Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jeremy. Happy
How
Friday.
Are you? Yes, happy Friday to you too. Glad you could make it this week rather than playing golf.
Well, I was kind of there as an avatar, wasn't I, last week?
Yeah, it was good. We'll catch up about your golf activity at the end of the show, I think. But yeah, it's quite funny. Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything insurance, London market-related, technology change. We've got our second part of the Claire Knight interview. So we've just cut up a few interesting segments, and we'll play those clips later on. But as always, we've got the news. So let me bring in my news first, Ben. Right. So I saw this on the website today. It was on the radio as well. There's some big news today. Insurers must not penalise loyal customers, says the FCA. Obviously, this is about hiking prices. So after the initial policy to get people through the door, the cheap deals, then the price goes up. So that's not going to be allowed anymore. So I haven't quite processed all these things, but it's actually quite a complex story when you start to unpick it, because there's a number of ways that you can think about it. Firstly, this whole kind of focus on price, I think, misses the point of insurance. It's a really valuable product that, when things go wrong, can really help you. And I think, for the industry to have over the years constantly competed on price, going down and down and down, pushing prices down, has kind of brought it on itself in many ways, and that needs fixing. And I think insurers are fixing that. In the conversations I have with insurers, they're becoming much more customer focused. We ran a session this week with Aviva, and they were talking about some of the customer-centric communications that they're now devising, and they're getting real data around customer preferences, what people really want, how they want to be interacted with, rather than just making assumptions. They're testing those assumptions and getting the data in. So I think things are changing, and I think they're deep-rooted problems. It's not just a pricing issue. I think it's deeper than that.
Yeah, I agree, Jeremy. And I think that one of the, I've been doing some work this week with a client around a particular product, and it's not common that we're doing that sort of research around what the customer needs are, but listening to brokers and then assessing the gap between what the underwriters think the product is and then the broker. So I think some of this is to do with the structure of the market and how collaboration works and how products are developed, because I can see so much of it gets stuck. And there's a lot of frustration, really, in this, and then perhaps not so much creativity around what does the customer actually want at the end of the day. Funnily enough, I think some of the products are, the insurance products themselves are actually okay, and there's all sorts of scope within the wordings to do quite new and different things. But a lot of them aren't sold, these benefits, because they've not been thought through as benefits. They're thought through as costs, or they're thought through as liabilities, so they're not really thought through as potential benefits for the customers, but they could be. And I think I really think we're at the bottom of the mountain at the moment with this, because it's a huge opportunity for the industry. And I know that big insurers that I've spoken to who've started to look at the data say it's amazing how quickly they can monetize some of these pieces of intelligence or insights as to what customers want. I think the industry's got to start to realise and just accept and admit it is a poor listener. It does not listen. It tends to think it knows it all. It talks about price and rates as if they know exactly what's going to happen, and they don't. Just admit we don't know. Let's go and ask the customer what they want and then adapt the products. And it would be so much better. And there'd be so much less of this kind of stuff that comes back from the regulator having to control things.
Yeah. And then the journalists come in and they obviously have the insurers don't pay narrative. It all kind of falls into that, and
it
we know
catches
that.
up with you because you're in a race to the bottom all the time.
Yeah.
And you justify being in the race to the bottom, your actions, but in the end, that's a problem. You'll get caught up and caught out, and the industry is constantly getting caught out with these things not because people individually are unethical. It's simply because they think that's the only way to run a business, but it isn't.
Yeah. I remember, just coming back to the products part, I remember talking to Dan Bishop, who's head of pricing, or was head of pricing, I can't remember now, at Hiscox. And he said one of the big challenges they had at Hiscox was convincing their high net worth individuals in their segmented thing that they were high net worth. They had assets that were worth over, I can't remember how much it was, but maybe 700,000 or something like that. But, there's, I think the whole communication and the way that insurance is, as you've just said, is positioned and communicated just needs to radically change. And I think you're right. I think there's massive opportunities for those that get it right. It's it's going to be a big win. Right, so let's move it on. So my other news, of course, is that the weather's getting better because it's a bank holiday. Unfortunately, it wasn't better last weekend for you and golf.
No.
But
We'll talk about that later.
We'll do that later. But yeah, it's actually warming up. I think it rained every day up until yesterday.
Yes.
At my house. But anyway, it's getting better. So that's
record-breaking. I think it's a record-breaking month for rain. It's been awful. And actually a bit of sun just feels so good, doesn't it? Cheers you up.
It does. Right. You got some news, Ben. What do you want to start with?
I don't mind. Ardonna,
Corant. Yeah, let's do this. Oh, that's not worked, does it?
No.
Let's try again. It's this new platform, you see. There we are.
Complicated. Right. So is it Corant? Who knows? But anyway, Corant is effectively, thankfully, no more in reality, because Ardonna Group has now triggered yet more consolidation in the broking market. We always talk about consolidation on here. This is a big one. It's $500 million. Basically bought all the BGC operations, of which Ed, Broking, Besso are probably the two best known, but there's a number of others in the group that tidies up that part of the market. 900 people. It's a business that has about 200 million revenue. So it's a significant player in the specialty market. And they now become, let's get this right, the largest privately owned independent wholesale broker. Yeah. It's probably a thing, I suspect, but it's a big one. What's he called? David Ross, I think, if I've got it right, is the chief CEO of Ardonna. Yes, I have got it right. He is saying this is all about choice, and it gives people choice against the thing, which I don't quite understand, because when you reduce from 6 bits to 1, that seems like less choice to me. But I see his other point, I think, which is that this is another significant specialty and specialist broker that will be in competition with what will soon become the big two, Marsh and Aon WTW. So, but it's really fast-paced consolidation here, and obviously in the carrier side of things. So I'm waiting for the next big carrier announcement. I suspect, I'll predict there'll be one in the next month. I don't know what, but I bet there'll be one. Yeah,
they're coming thick and fast. It's very interesting, isn't it? Just how quick these deals are coming around, and how it's going to change the landscape. Because these, as we talked about before, these big players wield a lot of power, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
These are quite complicated deals, but they're coming together really quick, so they really want to do them. They're not long drawn out things.
Cool. Right. We've got more. We've got so much news. It's unbelievable. So next, let's try this one.
Oh,
this is your service volatility index.
Yeah. So this is just a one stat of the week kind of thing.
Yeah.
We've launched a new series of indices. Actually, it's not an ad for them. I just wanted to throw it out there, see what people thought. So we're going to start talking about it. We've been looking at claims volatility, and this has been an issue for brokers in the London market for quite some time, because if you get claims service that's great from one player and rubbish from another, and they're both on the same risk, I think John Muir was referring to some of this a few weeks ago, that's a problem, right? So if the last one on the slip doesn't pay, or they mess about and create a problem, this is an issue for brokers and ultimately an issue for customers. So we've been measuring the consistency of claims service, and basically how this works is that we reckon around about 0 on this at the indices. If you looked at the lower axis, that would be a fairly low volatility or high consistency of service, and above that is less. So it's been jumping around a bit up and down, but the great thing about this is that it just jumped through the roof at COVID, and service consistency was all over the place. So we're going to monitor this. It has come back down again, which again is consistent with, I think, what is happening. So I think it's a really good piece of data for showing how the whole market is operating. And we're looking more and more at not just the COVID impacts, but what else is impacting this volatility and underpinning it, because it's really important for London to have this as low as possible, so that when people are dealing with businesses, insurers in London, they know that the service is going to be consistent, which it clearly isn't at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's a great piece of work, Ben. I think it will really help. As we were talking about before, I think it's just, if you've got the data, you can do something about it. And what John Muir was saying is that, especially on smaller claims, that service is quite shocking in some parts of the market. So that's good, excellent. And then we have the syndicate performance stat.
Yeah,
this is quite interesting as well, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, should have told everybody to get the numeracy mindset in place for this lot. So I tried to simplify it with smiley faces, emojis. Basically, this is the Katrine Shi at the Insider has done a nice piece again on the performance stats that Lloyd's publishes every year. Lots of people look at this, including ourselves, and I'll talk about that in a second. But basically, this is yet again concluding, and there was a good discussion on LinkedIn about this, that size is still irrelevant to performance. So all these things, in a way, you say, why should size be relevant to performance? Does it, smaller players can make money, larger players can make money, and both can lose money. So in the end, it's about some kind of quality. And this chart basically shows that the loss ratios on the left-hand side are very low, so that you can see there's a mix of players. I pulled out a couple there, Aegis and Chubb, obviously very, very different operations, but both reasonably profitable. And on the right-hand side, where it's much poorer performance, AXA XL, which you probably have heard about, read about, massive player, but not doing too well on the profitability front and having to make changes. A Brit syndicate there as well. So you see, size doesn't matter in this market. I'm not surprised, and I think it isn't something. I think going back many years in my research, we have concluded that isn't a big driver. But you then have to think beyond that. So what does scale and size give you? So clearly, if you look at Chubb and AXA XL, so Chubb's making profit, AXA XL isn't. And you can say, well, that's interesting on a pure profit basis. But actually, Chubb as a contributor in profit-wise and as a relevance in the market is massive, because it's a successful business like that operating at that level. And I'm not disparaging Aegis, but Aegis's profit will be more for its owners and its kind of local shareholders rather than anything bigger than that. So you're also looking at contribution, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing here is that is then the debate on LinkedIn, and rightly so, went into, well, what else could we look at? We could look at these type of numbers from all sorts of different perspectives. We have been recently, for example, looking at it from a service perspective, and we're going to be publishing a paper on that soon. And that has started, I'll share with our friends on the show, that has started to show some correlations that those that are better at service are generally more profitable, I think would be our pretty broad conclusion. It's never quite as simple as that. And then you've got to think, well, what does service mean? Why is it service? Is it the service itself, or is it the culture of the organization? Is it that they invest in certain things that really matter? Is it, to your point earlier on, that customers buy more, pay more? Who knows? You get into a very interesting world here of what does good look like. Broadly speaking, I think there is a split, though, between very large, genuinely in the market now, between specialists and very large players. So, you can't say to an AXA XL, suddenly become an Aegis tomorrow, and neither can you do the same in reverse for Aegis. So you need to look at this and say, well, we've got utility, really, businesses in this market. What's the usefulness? Well, I need a global player for my global program. So that's an AXA XL or a Chubb. It's probably not an Aegis. I need a specialty product out of Canada or whatever with cover holder arrangements or something else. That's my Aegis. So you pay as your money and you take your choice with these things, and then the businesses have to respond. So in a way, we're back to what is the business targeting? What is the need out there in the market? And you're looking at relevance, really, I think, in the end. Those that don't consistently lose money will get swallowed up and go, whether they're large or small.
Yeah.
That's the point. And so quality and strategy, I think, is a word that I would start to bring into this conversation, is where are they going? What are they trying to do?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we could talk all day on that topic, but we haven't got time because there's so much to get through. I want to get on to the second part of our interview with Claire. Phil's just mentioned in the chat the news of DXC announced yesterday as the partner to deliver the digital marketplace. It is news. I think we just got to wait and see how that pans out, and I think we just need more detail around exactly what the blueprint and this digital marketplace is going to look like, and some of the solutions around it. So yes, that's also this week. So let's get into the interview, Ben. So as I said, I've put together 3 clips for the second part of the interview with Claire Knight. This first one, I think you ask her, Ben, about whether she'd recommend somebody working in the London market. So let's pick up the interview. Here we go.
So the final question we tend to always ask, Claire, is, despite all of this, if a young person came up to you now, would you recommend they came into this market? Is it a sector you'd say you could have a good career in?
That's a really difficult one, Ben. Look, I think as a market, we have the opportunity to be really sexy, right? I think we do. I think in the future, there is a real opportunity for the future bright sparks that think differently can come in. But today, would I recommend somebody into the Lloyd's market specifically? I don't know. Would I recommend a woman come in? I don't think I would.
Mm.
I think I'd tell them to think very carefully. I genuinely think I would. I can't say that I sing and dance about the Lloyd's market, and I in the past I've heard myself say to myself, I've got to get out. I've got to get out. But I think in the future there is a huge opportunity. I can see it. I can see it. I mean, I'll share one story with you that's part of the reason, and this is a whole different conversation that Ben and I have had separately around diversity in the market. But just before lockdown, running in between the Lloyd's Cafe and up to the LMA's offices on the escalators, I got catcalled in the Lloyd's building on the escalator by a man I'd say under 25. Now, the concerning thing about that, other than the fact that it's in the workplace and it's in the Lloyd's building, the concerning thing about that is that a man of that age thought that he was well within his right to heckle an older woman in the workplace. So it's just one very small, very, very tiny.
Yes.
I just
things have to
charge.
change, don't they? Things have
Yeah.
to change, Claire. I agree with you. I mean, I think the data
Yeah.
says it. I think people say it. I think, I think we have to be. I know that the institutions say it, but it has to actually change.
Yeah, and I speak to young women in the industry, particularly young female brokers and young female underwriters. They're not having a good time, on the whole. I mean, I spoke to a young male broker yesterday, and he said, "Jesus Christ!" And he's just left a brokerage. He said, "I wouldn't recommend any woman go in and work for a brokerage. Nah, never. It's disgusting." This is a bloke in his early 20s. Been in the industry 2.5 years, and he was like, "It's a badge of honor to have a HR record."
Has to change.
It's horrible. Yeah, but that's a whole different conversation. I've actually done another podcast on that, the Risky Mix podcast. So if you're interested in all my other sections, look it up. Myself and Emily Shaw did a really great podcast with the Risky Mix.
We're back. So that I think that's really interesting, and I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think as you pointed out in the clip, the institutions, I'll say they're doing stuff, and they released something a couple of months ago, didn't they, that said, we're tackling diversity and this type of culture, but actually the stories on the ground from Claire there, clearly things aren't changing fast enough if they're changing at all. So it's just another call to action, isn't it? More than anything else.
That's good. I mean, it's Claire is refreshingly honest, and that's exactly what you should be about these things. You should be straight up about it. There's too much of the sort of PR comms speak around these issues. I think it's got to be sorted out. I mean, we've all had the conversations with women in organisations that Claire is reflecting on, and I think it's right to say that what Claire is actually saying is there's a huge opportunity, and it's being missed. And it's being missed because we're not addressing some of these things at the grassroots level that should have gone. Good to find someone under 25 in the Lloyd's building, though, as well.
I know.
Blimey.
Maybe they were lost. I don't know.
How many of them are there? There's only 3, according to our data.
Right. So so that's the first clip. Let's move on to the second one, where Claire's talking about sort of innovation, and this is it's quite interesting looking at IoT in commercial property. So let's pick it up and have the next clip.
No, I was just going to ask you what else you're working on and doing that's going to give us hope for the future.
I was going to say, I feel like the tone has been really quite challenged, and actually I think I think Lloyd's is quite challenged, but I think there's enough people out there that want change to happen, that want things to happen, that we can, if we just keep pushing and driving, then I think it'll happen. And one thing that I've recently become involved in is a new consortium called Sense, which is made up of a bunch of individuals from in and around the market. So the president is Helene Stanway, who is former AXA XL. She's now at Lloyd's. We're supported by Zurich, so Mark Budd, the head of innovation at Zurich. The founders are David Clamp of the Camelot Network and Juan Bernal of GSS Analytics. And it's just a really, really great bunch of people who are on this consortium, on this advisory board, who genuinely believe that in commercial property, we need to be turning the dial when it comes to risk management and the way that we manage commercial risk in the insurance space. And as an industry, we really ought to be the ones that are driving this, right? So it's we had our launch event a couple of weeks ago, very successful launch event. We were sponsored by Ernst & Young, who was supremely interested in what we're doing. Our next event's on the 10th of June, and that's all around climate and the challenges for our commercial property owners around climate, quotas that have been put into place, the changing regulatory landscape around climate, and what could and should we be doing as insurers, as the backbone of capitalism, basically,
Yeah.
to be helping in this regard. Is climate going to be the determinative factor that makes us change and use data in a different way, and make us in an industry stand, sit up and look at devices and operating systems and different ways of working, and the data that we have from a climate perspective as an industry? I think that's really interesting, is the data that we have as an industry around climate, and how could we be using that to help our commercial property owners to manage their risk better.
So I think that's really interesting. I think I took two things out of that. Firstly, and it comes back to the show that we did on Grenfell Tower, and basically one of the key things that came out of that show was that the industry should be leading on these things. They've got the data, they've got the insight, but they don't seem to have the innovation or leadership or whatever it is to be able to kind of think differently about their products and services. Coming back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, and I think it's really good, that there is a group of people that are thinking like that and are willing to try things and try and make things happen and lead from the front rather than just constantly reacting to things.
Yeah.
And go back to the BI claim fiasco. Constantly on the back foot. It's time to show the industry needs to show some leadership, and I think it's a great opportunity in commercial property.
Yeah, I do. I think for the fact of it going through one particular business line, admittedly a very large part of the insurance market and an important part, is good, because I think it focuses on specifics around what needs to be done specifically. But there, of course, are lessons for the rest of the market. But the way in which Claire and others are now starting to operate, and I would completely endorse this, is through this, as she's put it, conversations, good people having conversations about innovation, about where you go, about what you do, with hope for, I hope, actions and recommendations. There's too little of that in the industry. There's too much of the patting everybody on the back and bigging up everything as if it's all okay, and there's a place for that in all industries, but there's too much of a weight on that and too little on the, what are we really going to do and what role do we play? What's the purpose of insurance? And this is one of those. So good, more power to their elbows. The Sense Consortium.
Good. So a little bit on innovation there. So this final piece is kind of coming back to our central theme, which is around customers. And so let's pick up the interview with Claire here.
One of my things is I often walk into meetings in the Lloyd's in the London market, and I feel like I must have missed the first half of the conversation, because I don't know why we're starting this conversation where we are starting, and then later on I realised I didn't miss the first half of the conversation. That was the conversation. But I think when you start with a customer, it makes it like really much easier to understand every time. I always say to businesses when they're changing, if you're talking about service, let's start every meeting talking about the customer and what they want, and then everybody starts in the same place. But I think so many meetings and committees and everything else in this market starts with a kind of idea that you're all supposed to know something, but actually, in a kind of Dickensian nightmare, you don't actually know what the hell anybody else is talking about, but you think you ought to. Or maybe that's just me.
No, it's so true, and anybody that's ever worked with me knows that I've got a massive bee in my bonnet about the customer. So where my starting point in life was being faced off with a customer, right? So I was in court with those customers of the insurance policy who were being accused of horrendous things, right, under a professional indemnity litigation. These preeminent professors in their field of study that were working for these universities, I was in court with them holding their hands. Some people would come out in tears after being cross-examined on the witness stand in the High Court in London. And that's understanding customers, right? That's understanding that there are human beings involved here. So I've come into insurance understanding what it means to deal with a customer. And then obviously working for Hiscox, which is incredibly customer focused, working with the claims team, which is incredibly passionate and incredibly they're very emotional, you know, and rightly so. It's an emotive place to be, claims, particularly, you know, Hiscox household claims, for instance, you know, very, very emotive world. And I've sort of taken that with me, I think, definitely taken that with me through the journey. And whenever I walk into a room and whenever I look at stuff, I'm like, okay, well, where's the actual customer in this, and what does it mean to them? What's the so what for them? What's the impact on them? What can we deliver to them that makes a difference? And I think it's really important.
So back to the customer. It's almost like we thought about this, Ben, and planned it.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
The random process that this show goes through to be produced has a seeming logic to it. I don't know how that's worked out.
But it has, and we're back to customers. And yeah, you know, we couldn't agree more. We talk about it all the time on the show. We talked about it in the news. You know, understanding your customer, knowing what they want, what's valuable, and then delivering it and executing on that promise is just critical.
I think
I don't understand why it gets missed so often.
Well, I think one of the things is you've got to change the conversation. And actually, there was a LinkedIn piece this week. Julian James of Sompost said, I get really frustrated and fed up with the amount of talk about pricing in this market. You've mentioned pricing early on. And several people underneath, me being one of them, said amen to that. But it's almost like a sort of, and I say this, you know, carefully, but it's almost about men, and that it links the diversity issue. It's like, what are we going to talk about if we can't talk about emotions or soft or stuff? But we want to brush things under the carpet. So let's talk about something that we're all comfortable with, which is pricing and rates and rational stuff. And I think that's what's going on a lot of the time. Whereas actually we should change that conversation. I'm not saying you never talk about pricing. It has its place, as all things do. But this industry, compared with any other I've been in, is obsessed with pricing. And pricing is part of it, but also rate. I mean, not just pricing, but rate. Actually, pricing's active, but the rate and how they're determined is just a marketplace thing. So it's important, but we do need to focus on much, much more in our conversations on what products are we producing, for who, that they actually want to buy. Simple. It's not rocket science, but it is changing the conversation.
Yeah. And we'll continue to push at that door with our various projects and events and everything else. So that's good. Excellent. So thanks very much, Claire, for speaking to us. And let's now talk about the weekend. Let's talk about last weekend first, Ben, because regular listeners will know that you were not here. You were playing golf. What was the weather like?
Terrible. It was awful. And I'm looking out the window now and it's beautiful. You can't believe it was biblical, I'd say. Storm force winds, rain, about 20 milliseconds of sun one day. It was cold. It was awful, but I did have fun. But my God, I was broken at the end of the weekend. You know, I was staggering off the last hole, really. I don't understand what happened with that wind that came, because there was never a hole I played where the wind wasn't blowing into my face. So it's almost like you were being, you know, stalked by it in some way. But it was terrible. But it was great to get out and get away. And that's just another of these things that we all took for granted and now is feeling very novel and exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So any plans this weekend? It's quite a big weekend for sport, actually. You've got the Champions League final, end of the Giro. If anyone's watching the Giro d'Italia, it's absolutely gripping because Bernal blew up the other day and it's opened the race up again. So that's going to be great over the weekend.
Yes, I think I'll be watching that. That'll be great. That'll be really good. I actually want Burnell to win, but if Yates won, I wouldn't be too disappointed. But as long as it's a good end and it's not just a procession, that would be brilliant. Champions League would be interesting too. Yeah, I think I'll be watching that. And then my son's playing football, and we're going down to the in-laws. So I'm on the bike as well.
Good.
I'm cycling on Sunday morning in the sun.
Excellent.
In the sun.
The sunshine. Good. You'll be fine. You'll be complaining next week it's too hot. And we need to go back to the wind and rain, but maybe not.
It's a great week next week. It's looking brilliant in London anyway.
Good. Excellent. Right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you next week, and have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend all. Bye.